computing at the Open University. And many of our initiatives have been funded by JISC, which is one of the funding bodies called Joint Information Systems Committee, and they fund e-learning projects in the UK. BETA is another organization who fund research projects which have an impact on research, career training, and development. And finally, my own faculty, they have been very generous to me in many, many ways in terms of funding and support. And since there were so many colleagues who have contributed over the project, I couldn't name them all, but many at the Open University and elsewhere who have influenced our work. So what I plan to cover is that what is distinctive about social media technologies, and what have been the implications for educators, for students, for institutions, and for researchers. And finally, what I'll do is I'll try to outline some challenges for all of us in terms of research and otherwise. Now, the social media has many names. Some of them are social software and Web 2. So I'll give you some examples now just to set the context of how social media is being used in learning, teaching, and research. Now, this is a blogging page of one of our Open University's part-time students. And what he does is that he blogs on every course that he takes with the university. He's a psychology student. And how other students use his blog is sometimes to refer to the notes that he's created for that particular course, or sometimes for getting inspiration for taking on that course. If they want to take up that particular course, they get to know about what the course content extra is. Sometimes they contact him informally through the blog to find out more about a particular course. And what he has also done is he has linked up with other students as well. So he's got the OU bloggers list there. So he's linked up with other OU bloggers also. And this is a self-motivated blogging practice. It has not been said by the university that he should be doing it. And, but it is providing him with a community to interact with. And when I asked him why he does it, he says, wherever I am, I have a space where I can write. He travels a lot. He works with the British Telecom Labs, which is the BT Labs. And he says, I travel a lot, and this space provides me to write up my materials, my course materials, wherever I am. So that is a kind of a working space or a study space for him. Then there is another example which has been set up by our university and along with other funding bodies in the UK, including the Lottery Fund. And what this is, it's an example of citizen science. What you do is you set up an account on this, and let's say that you've spotted something in the nature outside, something in the flora and the fauna. And you've not been able to identify it, or it is something very distinctive. You've come across a moth or a particular plant or a fern which you've not seen before. And perhaps you know about it, it's very distinctive, or you don't know about it. So you put it into this in a picture. And there are other experts and mentors and other users on this site who would give the identification for it. But if you want to search for it yourself, there is a dictionary of scientific names for common names, which they have curated from the National History Museum. There are experts who volunteer on this site. So what happens is, over a period of time, there is a community has developed. People who discuss these observations, talk about the identification, and if you have wrongly identified something, an expert will correct you, and that is how a discussion happens. Now, this is an example of an informal participatory learning. But it is also, there are links to formal learning as well, because as the visitors to this site and people who have logins to this site, there is an OU course which is on this, which is on life sciences, which is related to this kind of an activity. So once they become interested in this, Open University encourages them to join that particular course also. So there is a link between this kind of an informal learning leading on to formal learning for interested visitors on this site. And this has become extremely popular. Initially, it was launched only in the UK. Now it has been launched in Ireland and in South Africa as well. So it is an example of citizen science and through social networking, how people are learning. This is a picture of Stonehenge. Stonehenge is a historical monument, not very far from London. And it has a historical significance, it has an astronomical significance because it's like an observatory. It helps you to predict the eclipses. And it has significance otherwise as a visitor as well. So now if people can't visit this, a group of scientists have built this in a 3D virtual world called Second Life. and visitors can experience, and they have simulated the eclipse happening in this environment. And scientists come to this site, they hold these kinds of open sessions when people can come. And I was in the audience here, and if I found out how many countries they belong to, there were more than 10 countries that people were here on this site. So how it is bringing people from different countries together in these locations with common interests. This is another example from a 3D virtual world where we went in to have, there was a poster exhibition, just as we have a poster exhibition here. A group of students, for this particular tutor who is in the picture here, this gentleman, he organized for his students so that the students could get feedback from an international audience. So we all went, he invited us in, and the students had put up their posters. We had an opportunity to talk to them, and that is how students' communication skills improve when they are speaking to an audience which is different from their own institution. And they also get the practice of communicating with the other world. Please. Now, this is an example of a wiki that we set up as a group of researchers. We found that there weren't enough resources for conducting research in virtual worlds. And a group of us were very interested in collating those resources based upon our experience, where there would be one place where researchers in this area could come and find out resources on how to conduct research in virtual worlds. And I have used wiki spaces here, and it took me not more than 10 minutes to set up this wiki and give access to other researchers as well. And now we are using it as a space to collate all those resources. Now, if not for the social media, setting up this as a university website, setting up accesses for other people external to the university to contribute would have been very, very tough process. But here we are able to do that. People come to our site, point us to resources, and we add them. So this is how collaborative knowledge construction or resource construction is happening. This is another example from 3D virtual world, and what I'd like to show you is the top picture shows how you would see it on a website. So this is how students would learn if they were learning from an animal cell on a website. Whereas this simulation is in Second Life, and what you find is that there is a 3D simulation of a cell, and as an avatar you can move around in the cell. And I don't know whether you can see me here. I'm right here. You can move inside this cell. You can click on the mitochondria and learn more about it. You can click on the nucleus and learn more about it. And this kind of a visual immersive learning is very different and unique than looking at the website and learning from the website. Then you can also practice real-life scenarios in these technologies. Like here, there are medical schools where students are brought into these kinds of environments for training before they go into real hospital situations. So if they are conducting an operation tomorrow, they come here, experience the environments, the equipment, the setup, how would they talk to a patient before they conduct the operation, and so on. So they learn about trauma management, and so these spaces have been set up for training and skills development. So you can go through real life scenarios, through role playing, and be much more efficient and prepared when you go into the real world. But you can also explore unrealistic scenarios. Now this is, these are pictures from a marine science lab in Second Life. And the first picture shows that how, the first picture shows that how you can go under the water in a submarine and you can find out about what the flora and the fauna is at the bottom of the ocean. Now this is these are black smokers, these are hydrothermal vents, and these are very important to study because they actually, studying this explains how minerals are formed. And what happens is that they have volcanic eruptions that happen, so the hot minerals come out of it, they collide with the cold ocean floor and a volcanic eruption happens. And you wouldn't be able to study it in real life because this is at the bottom of an ocean floor. But through these simulations and studying through these visual and immersive environments, it gives you a different kind of an experience which is much more, which you can retain for a longer time as compared to just looking at pictures. So just to bring all this together that we've seen so far, the various examples, I have used the Nonaka and Takuchi's knowledge management model just to explain how these physical spaces, 2D and 3D spaces, can be combined together. Now, Minocha and Takeuchi, what they say is that there is the tacit to explicit knowledge. There is a spiral cycle that happens. And this spiral cycle results in knowledge construction or knowledge generation. They say that learning only happens when you move between these various stages, which is socialization, externalization, combination, and internalization. So it's called the Secchi model. So what is tacit knowledge? Tacit knowledge is a knowledge that we hold in our heads. For example, when we come to a conference, we already have a mental model of how a conference works. That is tacit knowledge. Whereas an explicit knowledge is when I conduct a formal activity. So I learn by performing that activity. So I learn something new. I'm still applying my tacit knowledge, but I'm learning something new by doing that. That's explicit knowledge. Now, what happens in an apprenticeship, or if we are socializing or observing, what is happening is tacit knowledge is converted into tacit knowledge. And this can be simulated in Second Life by conducting simulation activities. They could be face-to-face meetings like we are here in a meeting where students sit in a seminar and talk to one another. So that's tacit to tacit knowledge. Whereas when they go and conduct an activity, that is an externalization. It could happen in Second Life, it could happen in a physical classroom setting. But now what happens is the next step is explicit to explicit knowledge. When they start connecting with ideas, what they had studied in the past, link it up with course modules, with course concepts and theories and frameworks, and they start these discussions. They might either record it in wikis or in blogs, or they might start having discussions in the forums. That is how the explicit knowledge is being converted into explicit knowledge. That means you are documenting it, you are writing it, whatever you've learned, you are converting it into explicit knowledge. But then the last step, which is the most important step, is internalization, when you start reflecting on your learning. And that is when you are either by looking at the discussions that have happened in the blogs or what you've written in the wikis, or you might meet in Second Life and talk to one another as to what this whole activity that we have done has resulted in. Or you might listen to podcasts that have been generated as a part of this process. You might, maybe the educator had given some podcasts, you listen to them, you revise them, and that is how the whole cycle then starts back again. So my idea of putting this was to show that how these different spaces, the physical 2D and 3D spaces, can be combined for serving these different purposes or going through this spiral of tacit to explicit knowledge, and which results in knowledge construction. So this is the Minocha and Takeuchi's model from the knowledge management literature, and there is a reference for our paper here which we have outlined more in detail. So what are the characteristics? Now we have seen some examples. We've also seen how they come together. What have they done so far? They have, as you would notice, they have opened up possibilities for educators, for students, and for researchers. They have triggered creativity and innovation. Many educators now use different kinds of technologies, using Flickr on a photography course, using Facebook for bringing students together on a particular special, on a SIG. That all is being done, and they are doing some very innovative things. Then there is also, they are also helping to bridge geographical distances. We've seen through various examples that how you can bring people together from different countries, from different locations into these environments. And it has also facilitated global partnerships in teaching, learning, and research, because now you have the collaboration and communication technologies which can help you in facilitating this. It also encourages public engagement, because if you discuss your research in a blog, or you talk about your initiatives in these social media technologies, or you make a YouTube video of what you've done in a particular topic, it also encourages public engagement. But there are other implications as well, which are more from our personal front. The face-to-face interactions are fewer now, and we are much more sensitized now to ethical issues about privacy and anonymity, because things all exist in the public domain. And therefore, when we are conducting research or when we are writing in the social media domain, we need to be very careful about the privacy of the people we are talking about, and the anonymity, and their anonymity as well. How much we should be disclosing? Are we working with an industrial partner? Are we working with a funding body? Should we be talking about it in the social media domain? Should we be discussing half-baked research ideas in the public domain? How would it reflect us if we were discussing all that? So that is what it has sensitized us to. We are also very concerned about how we maintain a distinction between our personal and professional profiles, how we maintain a social etiquette when interacting in the social media domain. It has also made us aware of how we manage our social and intellectual capital. By social capital, it means who we connect to. Should we be connecting to people who are our colleagues on the Facebook or otherwise? Or how we should be managing our intellectual capital, what we should be disclosing about our research in the public domain. That all is the intellectual capital. It's also made us aware that where our resources are being stored. So if we are using Google Apps, where are the servers on which our information is being stored? They are somewhere in the US. Or if we are conducting a survey on SurveyMonkey and we are talking about data protection to our users, but actually that data is being held on servers over which we have no control. They are somewhere in the US because SurveyMonkey is launched from there. So it has made us much more aware that when we use these technologies, where is our data being held? And the claims that we are making when we are conducting research or when we are interacting with their students regarding protection of their data, protection of the resources, are they really valid or not? So they have made us much more aware of that. So what has been the impact on students? The students' learning, skills development in our various projects we have seen and their employability has enhanced because of the use of social media technology. They are able to collaboratively learn. For example, in a wiki, you might give them an activity in a face-to-face session on a particular task, or in our case, where we had a software engineering course, where students are using wiki for collaboratively developing requirement specs in a wiki, so as to simulate how software engineers in globally distributed domains construct requirements in a collaborative manner. So we have given them those kinds of skills. They also learn to critically review, because when you're working together in a wiki, you learn to critically review one another's comments as well. So you will read each other's work and you will start to critically learn. And you also do reflective learning. And many students in our research had said that because we had written in a wiki or we'd written in a blog, when it actually came to writing the actual assessment, we went back and looked into what we had written in the blog and the wiki, and we could bring it together. Had we not had those notes, we would have perhaps taken more time in completing our assessment, because a lot of discussion had happened in the wiki where we had collaboratively developed or generated ideas, and they helped us to formulate our assignment, the formal assignment. It also helps in peer-to-peer learning and teaching. Peer-to-peer teaching maybe not in terms in which Gautam was saying, but implicitly. Because when you are reviewing each other's work, you are in fact pointing out to others that perhaps your understanding is not correct. And I was giving an example the other day that in one of our case studies that we looked at, in which we had introduced wikis in a software engineering course, one of the students said to us that when one of my team members pointed out after looking at the wiki that your understanding of this particular concept is not right, I said he's just saying it for the sake of it. He said when a second one pointed out that you are not right, then I thought perhaps there is something wrong, but I still didn't look back into my course book. When the third one said, I thought there is something definitely wrong, so I should go back into my course book and look. So it supports this peer-to-peer learning and teaching and implicit teaching. And you also gain transferable skills. You become much more a reflective practitioner. That means how many of us, after completing a software project in the industry, sit back and reflect as to what we've learned in this and how we can carry out further. I think reflection is something that we don't do very often because of the fast-paced work that we do. We tend to move from one project to another project very quickly. But this develops the inherent skills of being how you can be a reflective practitioner. It gives you online communication skills, which are very important if you are working in workplace settings. And you also learn to work in a team in globally distributed environments. And over a period of time, you develop a portfolio where you can record your online resources at a particular place. And over a period of time, you can record your skills development, what you have done as a part of your studies and what you've done in your industry. And you get an online portfolio to take with you and to keep it with you, and you keep developing it. But there are some concerns as well. It is not very easy to introduce new technology to students. If you want to introduce a wiki on a course or a blog on a course, it does take a lot of time to convince students as to why this technology is being introduced, what the skills would be, it would be imparting, and so on. And students come with diverse mental models. The difficulty with social media technology is that we are using it for personal purposes as well. And when introduced in a professional setting, there is sometimes a mismatch of the mental models because we are used to looking at a technology in a particular way. And if you start seeing the same technology in an educational way, it is hard to register that. And therefore, it is a challenge for educators to match these different kinds of mental models that people come with. As with face-to-face settings, there is a kind of a concern among students about group working, about ownership of the contributions that they make in these tools. So if they have commented on blogs, are they going to be commented on the number of times they have commented on a particular blog, or are they going to be or is the tutor going to look at the quality of comments? So there is always a concern about number of times I should do it, or I should do it once, but I should do it properly. So it's always very hard to get that balance amongst the students unless they are properly guided how they are going to be assessed. And interacting with tools in the public domain, students are increasingly becoming cautious that they are, if they go for future employment, they are going to be searched about their profiles in the social media domain. So they are very concerned that while they are working on a course, they would rather work within the firewalls of the university so that all the material that they generate while they are learning is within the firewalls rather than being in the public domain. But on the other hand, students who are experienced in the social media domain, they would rather like it have in the public domain because it becomes a kind of an online portfolio for them that everybody can see what kind of research they are doing or what kind of work they are doing. They want to have that visibility. And again, it's a very big, it's a challenge for the educators and the institutions to strike this particular balance. And sometimes our students come across dialogues and resources on the web which are not based on evidence. And they see those, and if we don't cover that in our class or in our teaching with them, they feel that they get the wrong perceptions about the educator, that perhaps we don't know about it or we are not aware of it, but we may not be covering it in the class because it might not be based on evidence. So I think to help in this sense making of which resources one should refer to and one should not refer to, and getting those skills of filtering and searching is another task that we have to do with our students. And because there are frequent interruptions because of these tools, it can distract from deep reflection and it can cause information overload as well because you're constantly being interrupted either by Facebook updates or by Twitter updates and so on. And employers, as I said, prospective collaborators look at these social media profiles of the candidates, and therefore that is another concern that we as educators have for our students and students themselves have as to what they should be writing and what they should be communicating in the public domain. So what has been the impact on educators? What we have seen is in our research over the years that there are these four kinds of educators' roles. So educator, as always, is involved in pedagogical design, but now he has to design learning activities suitable for that particular tool. That is how this tool can provide the skills or the intended learning outcomes. He also sometimes does not have any support from the university. Most initiatives that we've evaluated as a part of our research have been set up by individual educators. And as a result, they get no support from the institution in terms of technical. And I know one of the examples that always is fresh in my mind is how an educator in one of the colleges, further education colleges in the UK we met, every evening she used to wait to take a backup of the wiki, thinking that the students are putting in so much of effort, what happens if it gets lost? And she had no support, right? Starting from setting up username and passwords of the students to the backup, she was doing it all on her own, in addition to helping students to work on this wiki. And you have to train and impart digital literacy skills as well. And digital literacy is the skills, the knowledge, the understanding that enables creative, discerning, and safe practices when you're engaging with digital technologies. Whether it is you're teaching them about wikis, or whether it is blogs, or whether it's a set of technologies that you're using, you have to give them these basic digital literacy skills. So educators have to do that as well, because there are hardly any institutional initiatives that provide these digital literacy skills to students. And then they're also performing the role of facilitation and mentoring. When students, as in face-to-face, we face these difficulties when they can't work well in a group, they come and say, she's not contributing. The same thing happens in a wiki. They will come and complain, she's not interacting on the wiki, she hasn't contributed in time, what should I be doing? Or they are not constructively commenting on one another's comments, what should we be doing? So you have to perform the role of facilitation and mentoring also. So an educator's role has become much more diverse by the use of these social media technologies. So what are the implications for educators? There are some very good positive examples where the educators, because of looking at the contributions of the students in the blogs or in the wikis, or generally by looking at how they are working in these technologies, they are able to intervene early. So early interventions can support them before the formal assessment comes to you. And you can correct your understanding, you can clarify your understanding. You can also adapt your teaching in face-to-face settings by seeing how they are working in these collaborative environments. And that, in many cases, has also helped in student retention in the case studies that we've looked at. Also, they are now teaching much more interactively rather than broadcasting, because most of the time they are putting up podcasts, they are putting up podcasts in which students can already be prepared before they come to the seminar or to the class, and therefore the classes are now much more interactive. Their students can perform more activities based in actual practice and context. So more of the contextual learning is happening, where they are learning more on how they can apply their learning into real life situations. So that is also that is good for students, and it's a good implication for educators as well. But many educators are now becoming evaluators as well. Like I myself, when we introduced wikis for the first time, we were very keen to find out whether they worked or not. Had we not done the evaluation, had we not got the feedback from our students, we wouldn't have been able to improve the initiative. So for the sustainability, for the improvement of the initiative, we had to do evaluations. And I had not done any pedagogical evaluations before. My only background was in HCI. And so many of us who have launched these initiatives on our own, we have become evaluators. And because we have to do it under a lot of constraints, in the sense we are using different kinds of technologies, there is not much of background that we can fall back upon. They're all new technologies for us. And we have to do them under the constraints of taking very less time of our students to conduct these evaluations. So we have to come up with novel methods of evaluation, which are non-intrusive and which can yield, and yet they can yield very useful data for us for feedback. And therefore, we take a very multidisciplinary perspective. Now, most of the methods that I use for evaluation actually come from the social sciences domain. And there also I try to mix it, and some of them come from the consumer behavior domain. When I look at how students are interacting, what the student experience is, what is the service quality we are providing to them. So all that, I am using techniques and models and frameworks from other disciplines, because otherwise you cannot get the wholesome perspective of evaluation for these particular emerging technologies. And the other advantage is we are able to provide a multimedia and a multimodal experience to our students through the use of these social media technologies. And that is another advantage because it suits different learning styles of the students. Sometimes some students are very visual, some students like to reflect a lot on their learning, so we are providing them with a variety of tools to suit their needs. And there is also a concept of digital or social scholarship that is coming up. That is, educators themselves are involving in these social media domain. They are blogging about their research, they are talking about their research initiatives, and they are becoming much more open about their research. And the idea of a digital or social scholarship is, it is the practice in which social tools become an integral part of your research and publishing process. That is, right from the start, when you are formulating research ideas, you start sharing it with other fellow collaborators or in the public domain, and you are able to publish, and they prefer publishing it in open access journals and not going through copyright domain. So this is all happening because of the digital and social scholarship. And some universities, including our own, there is now a promotion criteria as to how much you are involving yourself in digital scholarship. That is, are you really involving in these tools, with these tools for public engagement, for talking about your research, for connecting to other research collaborators? How many collaborators have you had while you've been blogging on this particular topic? So there is a lot of emphasis, because the entire assessment exercise that we have in the UK for finding out how well we are doing in our research, there is a lot of focus on what impact your research has had. And that impact can only happen if you are interacting with people in the public domain, talking to people who can understand your research in very simple words. So writing that research in a way, in a blog or in any other forum where people can understand about your research. So the public communication skills and public engagement are becoming increasingly important. In fact, many authors now start publishing draft chapters of their books on the blog so that they can get feedback from readers before the book goes into publication. This is becoming very common now. So this is what is meant by openness, conversation, and collaboration. So educators are really burdened. We are supporting our students to adopt these social media technologies, and yet we also have to work towards these for digital scholarship. There are various issues for the educators as well. They have to manage these diverse needs. And it's not always possible to transfer the initiative. So Wiki has worked well in one particular course because these technologies are very contextual. They are based around a set of learning outcomes. They are based around a set of skills. You may not be able to transfer the initiative onto another context or discipline. And that is why most of the time there are very few generic outcomes that you can take from one initiative to another initiative. And that is why you've got to start almost afresh when you set these up. And that is always that increases the workload, increases the work. You also have to design activities. There is very little help out there as to how you should design activities for these kinds of technologies. What you should be designing, which is very suitable for a blog, and perhaps a wiki can't do it. Or what you should be designing for a Twitter, which can't be done in a blog. So you have to do the learning activity design as well, because students are not going to use any technology, or they will be reluctant to adopt the technology if they can't see how it is situated within the course. They also have to design assessment, and there is very little guidance out there as to how you design assessment for these social media technologies. And we faced a lot of hurdle when we first introduced wikis as to how we don't increase the workload of our tutors, and yet our students are able to work in a wiki to provide evidence to us in Word documents that they submit to us without us looking at the wiki that they have performed this collaborative activity. So it's a big challenge for us to design the assessment where they don't feel that they have been unreasonably marked because they have probably contributed less on a wiki, but yet it may have been very effective. So I think it is always, I don't think we've got the balance as yet. We've tried our best, we've improved over a period of time, but to get a balance is very difficult. The only thing we can do is not to devote too many marks to this activity so that even if we are not able to do it as effectively in our assessment, it doesn't affect the overall assessment of the course. And as I said earlier, the educator has to perform the role of a facilitator or mentor also. And I don't think that our educators are provided with those facilitation skills for online domains. I mean, there is a different skill set required for facilitating in the online domain as compared to a face-to-face domain, because you get no cues how students are responding to what they're discussing in the forums, how you should be commenting on them, and so on. And all this has enhanced their workload. And this is a worrying thing, because how much can you sustain over a period of time if the workload is so much? And how do you manage diverse stakeholder relationships? I mean, when we started with the Wiki initiative, I was so concerned that if what happens if there is the assignment deadline is, let's say, Monday, and if it stops working on a Saturday. Because if the wiki doesn't work, that's the weekend students are going to be working. We have part-time distance education students. So the whole initiative would fall because the students are going to complain, your tool wasn't working. So I had to maintain direct links with the technical support team. We had to speak to the VLE director, which is the Virtual Learning Environment Director, that we are the first to launch this in our university. We need your support so that we can have this. I had to speak to our faculty because we are, every course has a large number of students at our university. And this particular course had 120 students over 5 months that they were going to do. So it is not easy to introduce something which would fail for 120 students. And they are very heavily priced courses where people from software industry come and do our courses for their skills development. So I had to first convince the faculty why I was doing this. And it took a bit of time. So you have to manage diverse stakeholder relationships, especially if you're doing the initiative on your own and with very little support from the institution. And what is the impact of institution? The impact is that tools have been able to overcome geographical distance. So they definitely feel that these tools of communication and collaboration that social media provides, you are able to connect to a wider audience as compared to before. And it helps in student retention. As I gave you the example that educators can look up the blogs and wikis and they can see that this student needs help or this student cannot progress very well, so let me help him in a particular way. So the early intervention helps in student retention. It also helps in image building. I mean, these communities have been set up now where alumni are coming in and talking on those communities. So they don't have to physically come to the campus, but they can provide their expertise through these online communities. You can set up industrial placements. They can come and hold seminars in these online environments and make students aware of what the industry's requirements are. So this alumni building is another thing, alumni community building is another thing that institutions can benefit from. It can also contribute to employability by showcasing work. So if you are on a digital photography course, putting pictures on Flickr, you can actually use it as a showcasing that this is all the work of our students. Or hold an exhibition in Second Life about the various students' projects that they have done. And it happens quite frequently in the 3D virtual world, where an international audience comes and looks at various design projects, because you can design 3D simulations as well. So amongst design students, art students, science students, 3D virtual world is very good for public interaction. Sorry. There was another thing I wanted to say here was that we had a case study in which they had set up a Facebook group to find out what they feel about, what the students feel about the library. They were changing the library configuration, a new building was coming up. So even such communities can be used to get student feedback and different perspectives of the students. Okay, now what concerns institutions have? They still worry about the tools in the public domain. They have no control over the tools that they use. So if these tools are embedded in assessment or they are embedded in direct learning, then it's a problem. If you are just using Facebook to collect students' feedback, even if Facebook isn't on one day, it doesn't matter. But if it's based on assessment, it does matter. They're also worried about the reliability of the tools. I mean, as I was telling the other day, when Yahoo suddenly announced the take-up of Delicious, which is a social bookmarking tool, everybody was concerned about what will happen to the bookmarks they have saved. Now, if a course dependent on maybe a course was dependent on this social bookmarking tool as a part of their assessment, it would be a very worrying situation because you have just no control. Overnight, these tools can disappear. And there are firewall issues as well because these things are happening in the public domain and not within the university's firewalls. They also have concerns about support from external organizations. I mean, institutions who are taking up Google Apps are spending a lot of time in setting up their contracts in terms of the availability that they would have, in terms of where the servers would be, where the student data would be held, and so on. So they are quite, it is very difficult to get rid of these concerns. There are resource implications as well because there are workload issues for technical support teams, for educators, in setting up these social media initiatives. And these are all were not accounted for when people were taken in terms of their employment. And how to get the balance between adopters and non-adopters. So not everybody is adopting social media tools. So how do they distinguish between people who are doing that and how do they get the balance right? Because the people who are adopting them are finding the benefits of it. But to get the non-adopters to convert to this is very difficult. And how to get this balance is a big challenge for institutions. And they're also worried about the appropriateness of the content which is being put in the public domain, either by their students or by their educators or by their other workers in the. And how to teach digital professionalism. That is how students and educators should be interacting in the public domain when they're doing it in a professional manner, in the sense when they are representing the university or their institution. Now, the success factors from the various case studies that we've looked at, so I'll try to summarize. I mean, I've highlighted the concerns of the educators, I've highlighted the concerns of the students, I've also talked about the advantages that these tools have brought, and I've also highlighted the concerns of the institutions. But the story is quite good. Various case studies have shown that we think that with the online tools, the educator would probably get sidelined, but educator is becoming increasingly important. And as you've seen, educator is performing different roles in these initiatives. What is also important as a success factor is how do you situate the technology within the learning activity? And how do you clarify the role of the technology to the students? So as I was mentioning the other day, that when we introduced Wiki in our course, we wrote personal letters to every student explaining how the Wiki would benefit your skills development, how would it benefit the learning on this course, why we were introducing it. We gave them links to papers from IBM. IBM is using these their setup software development. That is why we are teaching you to do this. So they have to see the link of how these technologies would help them in their workplace situation or would give them skills for the workplace. So you've got to clarify the role of the technology. You've also got to ensure the usability of the technology, because if there are these breakdowns happening in the basic interaction with the technology, if the window is too small, if you're not getting enough feedback, or if you don't know whether a message has been posted properly or not, all these can be extremely annoying for the students, and they can really mar the student experience. So usability of the technology is extremely important. And you have to provide user guidance and social norms. Students, when they come up fresh, they may not know how they have to perform work in a wiki, or how they have to critically review somebody's blog, or what should they be writing in a tweet, because they may not have the right kind of examples to look at. So you've got to provide them with these social etiquette guidelines as educators. And you have to build in socialization as well. And socialization is not same as icebreaker that you do at the start of a session or a start of a workshop, and you say it's an icebreaker, you do your introduction, and now you can work collaboratively together. It doesn't happen that way. If you really want students to effectively collaborate in an online environment, then socialization has to come at various stages of the life cycle of the course. So whenever you want your students to perform an activity, before that there should again be a socialization, because they had worked collaboratively earlier. It doesn't mean necessarily that you have to re-establish or reconnect them by doing some activity. Now this socialization could be pointing out a web resource to them which is relevant to the course and asking them to discuss about it. Now it's a simple activity but which will bring them back together. Then, and what happens is the next course activity that you give them, since they would have already connected to this simple socialization activity, they would perform much more effectively. Because online learning maybe is not happening all the time. They might be having face-to-face learning, they might be having revision weeks, so you've got to build this socialization activity in between all the time to create that kind of social presence that they know one another well and then they start collaborating effectively. There was an example coming to my mind, but if it comes in later, it's just slipped away, so I'll talk about it. I mean, there is a socialization example coming. So what has been the impact on researchers? I have made a separate category of researchers, not to say that educators don't do research, but by researchers here I mean PhD students and early career researchers. That is, what is the impact of social media on their working, on their research, what is happening? They are using a variety of technologies to support the research activities, and in one of the projects that we did for VTI, we found that there were these 6 categories that they are using these various technologies for. They are using it for formal dialogue with their supervisors. So it could be technology like AView or Blackboard Collaborate that we use, which is an equivalent of AView, or it could be Skype, or it could be setting up a blog which is dedicated to that particular project. It's a closed blog which only the student, the research student and the supervisors can access. And that might be a mode for conducting this formal interactions with your supervisor. Or they are also using these social media technologies for informal interactions. Again, this informal interaction could be through a public blog, it could be through a Twitter, and it could be through instant messaging with peers. So that is what is informal interaction. And students meet a lot in Second Life. There is a group of PhD students who meet regularly in Second Life, and they have formed their own self-help study group in Second Life. So if you're working in a particular area, you can form your group and you can meet in these areas. So it is much easier to connect now with fellow researchers than in the time when I did my PhD, which was very much in a singular and a lab-based, individual-based work. It's much more now a social experience. And they're also using it for document sharing and storage. We talked about Mendeley the other day. There is Zotero, so bibliographic reference management systems that we used to use earlier, like EndNote, which was a university licensed system. Now people are using tools in the social domain like Mendeley, Zotero, etc. What these tools provide you with the advantage is that when you move from one institution after completing your research and move to another institution, you still are carrying your whole bibliography with you. You can also access this bibliography through your desktop. You can also access it on the web. So if I didn't have my computer here with me and I wanted to refer to a paper, if Kamudi asked me about learning analytics, I'll say I have a paper on it and I'll show it to you. I'll open my bibliography on the web and I can point out that paper. But also these tools help you to connect with other researchers. So it is not just my Mendeley account. I can also see who else is conducting research in this area and connect to them. So it is that is what document sharing and storage. They're also using Dropbox, as we all do, box.net and so on. And they're also using social media tools as a space for reflection. Blogging is very common amongst PhD students. They write about what they are reading in their literature review, if they have been to a conference, what their reflections from a conference are. Some of the PhD students set up a group blog. A group of PhD students in a particular research group, they blog together. So sometimes one posts the other, sometimes the other person posts. So the responsibility is divided amongst 4 or 5 researchers who contribute on this group blog. And they also use various free tools that are available, like FreeMind. It's a mind mapping tool. So these tools are also becoming very common, where you can use these tools for drawing your concepts, for connecting ideas, and so on. And they're also engaging with the community. I mean, I remember the only way you could engage with the community was to go to a conference and to meet with people, or if somebody came to your university or institution to conduct a seminar. But now they are engaging with the community through other various tools. If they have a public blog, they are interacting with the community that way. If they have a Twitter account, they are not only interacting with other people in their research area, but they're also looking at what the funding bodies are talking about. They can have the Twitter feed from the funding bodies. They can have Twitter feed from other people in their research area. And one of the researchers that we interviewed, she's doing research in cognitive science. And she said that through my Twitter feed, I came across a professor in the US who is working quite in a similar area to what she was. And she got some very useful resources through him. And she said, if not for the Twitter, I would have never discovered him. And she maintains 2 Twitter accounts, as I was discussing the other day, a personal and a professional. So sometimes you might like to divide your personal and professional profiles that way. And what she does, as I was giving the other day an example, that she blogs, and she then, if there is a post that she wants some feedback on, she will also post it in her Twitter feed, so that whoever is following her or whoever she's connected to can comment on it. So these kinds of tools, you don't have to be a user of all these tools in the sense of having a username and a password. You can even search on Twitter for the people that you would like to know about. Now, there are a few people in the e-learning area that I like to see what all they are doing, what all they are talking about, what resources they do. So every evening I spend about 10 minutes going directly to their profiles on the Twitter and seeing what they have talked about in a day. And many new resources, events, I get to know just by looking at Twitter feed and without having a Twitter account. Or you could search for a particular area. So if you were doing research, let's say in learning analytics, you could put #learning analytics or some other hashtag if you know it's a popular hashtag. And then you can see what all people have been talking about recently about that particular area. And sometimes you do come across very, very through these. And the students are also, researchers are also using these tools to keep themselves informed. TED Talks is a very common thing, but they are also using iTunes U. They are also using podcasts from other universities to keep themselves informed. Many students actually go and look up at YouTube as well as to what others are saying about similar kind of research, how they're presenting their research in these YouTubes to gain inspiration from it and to create their own public management initiatives or public communication initiatives. So these are the various technologies, these are the various ways by which early career, the project that we did with early career researchers and research students, they said that there are so many tools out there. So it bothers them that they don't have enough of guidance which to choose and which not to choose. And most of it is by trial and error. As you start using those tools, you find the right need for it. Sometimes they also question, is it worth the time and effort? And I think one should really see about the return on investment. That means the time you're spending on, how many connections are you really getting by tweeting every day? Or how much useful information are you really getting by putting up a blog? If nobody visits your blog, or you must find ways to actually involve people. You must deliver something of value in these blogs to get people connected. And there are ethical, moral, and legal issues of interactions as well. So if you're doing research on a particular topic, should you be talking about your participants, which might give away their anonymity? So what you should be disclosing in these blogs, or whatever social media you are using about your research, and especially if you're working with other collaborators, there are some ethical, moral, and legal issues as well. How do you create a researcher's profile? How do you represent your research? That is another topic that they worry about. Should I be using LinkedIn? Should I be using academia.edu? Or should I be setting up a blog, which is an equivalent of a website where I can put in all my research information? And how to maintain professional boundaries. This is again a challenge for researchers, how they can say to people whom they don't want to connect to on Facebook or on LinkedIn. And the most important worry that they have is when they're writing on a blog or otherwise is, who is the audience? Are they writing for themselves? Are they writing for a possible fellow collaborator? Or are they writing for maybe just for public, for a general audience? So the who is the audience is a question that has come up several times in our research projects, whether we've done research on blogging or in general with how researchers are using technologies they worry about or they're not clear about who their audience is. And who owns the data in the cloud? So if you are using these tools in the cloud, such as Box.net or Dropbox, who owns the data in the cloud? Or even if you're using Gmail, now who owns the data? Who is the information that you've captured in these applications? Who actually owns it? So there are ownership, copyright, and intellectual property issues, and they are worrying for students. So what we did was, from our about 3 or 4 blogging projects, where we looked into self-motivated blogging. Why do students go and blog on their own? And we also did some course-directed blogging. We came up with this framework that these are the 4 issues: audience, comments, presentation, and community, that really bother students. Who my audience is? Should I be looking for comments when I use a blog, for example, or how should I be presenting myself? Should it be a formal presentation? Should it be a conversational style? Am I looking to develop a community out here? And what we have done in the paper that I have given there is that the reference of which I have given, for each of these 4 things in this framework, we have derived a set of questions from our research. So if somebody, as an educator, you are designing an activity for blogging, then you can use this framework to see how you are going to design that activity and how you're going to provide guidance to the student on how he should be blogging. So that is how the educator can use it. But if a student wants to use a self-motivated blogging, again, he can use the questions behind this framework and to answer those questions for himself as to how he should be using the blog. And why the reason I have put up just this framework for guiding blogging is that I wanted to highlight that there are very few of such frameworks that exist in the literature. Whether you, for blogging, for tweeting, for most of the tools, you will find very little guidance available. So you have to almost start from fresh. So that is why Sridhar had asked me a question the other day, that how do you come up with these generic outcomes which can enable other people to take up these initiatives? So as researchers, I think it is very important for us to do research over a period of time so that we can come up with these generic frameworks or generic outcomes which others can adopt us. Because only then can we sustain our initiatives. But by doing research over 6 months, over one presentation, is not going to be enough to generate the generic outcomes which others can apply and use it. So it has to be done over a sustained period of time to come up with these kind of frameworks. And this is, we had done research on 3 course-directed blogging projects and one with a self-motivated PhD student blogging project. And it was only after about 1.5 to 2 years that we came up with this framework. So let me now conclude by saying what the challenges for us are and what are the various research areas that we should be looking for in the future in this area. The challenges are how to get educators involved. Now, there are a few educators, almost in every institution, who are adopting these tools and making good use of those tools because they have gone through the process of comprehensively thinking about the initiative, how it would benefit the students, and so on. But there are various other non-adopters which we have not been able to convert. And in most institutions, you will find that majority of the people we've not been able to contribute. because there are so many other things happening that this seems like an add-on. So how do we get people involved? That is one of the challenges. How do we sustain these initiatives? I talked about the workload issues. I talked about not having support from institutions. If these things we are not able to overcome these obstacles, or if the workload is so high that we feel we can't sustain it as educators ourselves, then it is very hard to sustain these initiatives over a long period of time. So they have to become manageable. So they can only become manageable if we get the right amount of support to do these initiatives. And as I said earlier, how do we derive generic outcomes for transferability of these initiatives? That means whether it is the use of blogs, can I come up with a framework or any guidance which says, when you are doing an initiative or wiki, these are the things that you should be considering. These are the affordances of the tools that are most suitable for these kinds of activities. Can I come up with this mapping of affordances of the tools and the activities it can do? The same with blogging, the same with tweeting. There is so much of variety at the moment in which these tools are being used because these tools are changing themselves. They're ever changing. I mean, Facebook keeps changing its privacy and security things. And other tools also in their designs, they keep changing. So it's very hard to come up with this mapping of affordances and the learning activities. And if we can do that, then that is a very useful guidance, and that will help to overcome the challenge of how to get other educators involved who really want to take up something and get on going with it rather than doing everything afresh. Then there is the idea of learning analytics, and I was asked this question by one of the enhanced EDU members the other day, by Lakshmi, I think. Learning analytics is quite a new area in the sense I have only started recently looking into it, and when I look into the literature, it's only about 2 or 3 years that people have started talking about it. What learning analytics is, let me give you an example. For example, if I was having a pedometer and I was looking at how many steps I walk every day, so it's a quantitative measure of what I am doing every day, how much walking I am doing every day. So that is an example of collecting some quantitative data of the activity you are doing. Business analytics is very common. I mean, if we go to a store and we shop regularly there, they see the patterns of what we shop, and they accordingly send us offers. And for those particular days that we normally go and shop with them. So that has been always very common in customer relationship management initiatives. But learning analytics is that when a student comes on to an online environment, how you track the student as he goes along navigating across this online environment. Where does he find the obstacles? Does he complete the full activity? How much part of the activity did he complete? How many activities did he complete overall? So all this information is captured, and that enables the educator to maybe to intervene in some way, to help the student in some way, and so on. But there are lots of issues about, I mean, on one side, social media is it's helping in transparency. Everything is in the public domain. Most of it is in the public domain, and it's the main idea of social media is it's a very transparent media. But what is happening in this learning analytics is these all measures are being measured in the back end. And sometimes students may not know what is being captured in terms of their interactions, how their interactions would be used by their educators to trace their movement across these sites. So it is not a very transparent process. And so it is very important to tell the students what you are tracking, how you are tracking, and what you would be using that information for. So there are ethical issues which need to be tackled first as to how these learning analytics should be applied. But then it is also very important to see what is the information these learning analytics are giving, which qualitative measures or qualitative initiatives of conducting research with your students about their learning and the pedagogical effectiveness of the initiative can't be done. So how much does learning analytics provide which other techniques cannot provide? And also learning analytics, when you come to counting, then it would be how many blog posts have you contributed, how many times have you tweeted. And when that happens, then students sometimes get confused as to how they are being assessed and how they are being perceived by their educator. So there are all these related issues to learning analytics which yet remain resolved. And who is the audience for this learning analytics? Is it the students that you're going to provide information about their learning? Is it the institution? Is it the educator who is going to see at the learning analytics and the visual representation of these analytics and go and comment on the students? And what all you should be collecting? I mean, there has to be a definite plan of what all you gather as well. So there are these issues, and I am sure that this area is going to pick up in the future, and it's already doing so. And the other thing is that the educators, one of the other challenges that I talked about earlier is that as educators, we are also becoming evaluators. Because when we are setting up these initiatives in our innovative manner, then we need to evaluate these initiatives as well. And why these initiatives evaluation is so tough? It is tough, it is very resource intensive, because this is something as a side activity we do. It is not a part of the actual work that we are supposed to do. But we have taken up this, we implement an initiative, and it becomes very resource intensive. And resource intensive in planning and running, and seeing the whole cycle of feedback and change, because we are trying it for the first time. So we need to see how well it is working or not, and then feed it back into the process. And that is what we've done. I mean, the Wiki initiative, we evaluated it for 1.5 years before we were sure things are settled. And now it is working for the last about 4.5 years. We've not had to make any change. But the first 1.5 years were the toughest time when we had to evaluate it, every presentation, to see how we can improve it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to sustain it for so long. And even the researcher doesn't have a full grasp of the technology. I mean, there are so many technologies out there. If I adopt a technology, I may not know all the affordances of the technology, all the characteristics of it, and therefore my evaluation is never going to be that comprehensive that I would think it is going to be. And also, as I have given examples, that it is not just one technology that sometimes we use. We use technologies in conjunction with one another. Like there would be a blog, or there would be a discussion forum, or there would be Second Life, people are doing synchronous activities, and there is an asynchronous blog or a wiki which is recording their asynchronous discussions. So tools are used in conjunction with one another, in combination with one another. And that is why your evaluation anyway is much more detailed, and it is spread over more than one tool. And the ethical considerations are also unique for these tools. I mean, the ethical, we've always, as researchers, we've always followed ethics. But for these environments, it's much more unique because of the anonymity, tools being in the public domain, and also about the privacy aspects of these tools as well, and the data protection aspects, which is a part of ethics. So this is the final slide in which I've captured what the research agenda for the future is. I've talked about the challenges, that these are the things that are going to come. First of all, I think the role of the educator, as I said earlier, is changing. From a content creator, the educator is becoming more of a curator. That means how you bring these different resources together. And you have to help students in this sense making. That is, if there is a variety of resources from different sources coming from YouTube, there are blogs which are relevant to the course, there are some wiki posts which are relevant to these course. How do you bring these different web resources together, 2D and 3D resources together for students as a pack, and make sense, and so that students can make sense of it? So you have to help in that sense making. So it is, the focus is moving more from, you don't have to create everything new now. You can curate. And there is an increased focus on facilitation as well, because all these tools require a lot of facilitation. And I feel that there could be an impact on face-to-face learning also, because now we've seen the benefits of what these tools have brought. Wikis can support collaborative learning. We've seen blogs can support reflective learning, and we have, it's not just the tools that are provided, it is the activities that we've asked our students to do have provided these skills. So if you take out the tool from there, if I take out the wiki, and I try to do the same activity in a classroom setting like this, then it can maybe provide the same benefits of collaborative learning, of team working, and so on. So many of these initiatives might start influencing our face-to-face learning as well, which is in a face-to-face situation without the use of technologies. So I do hope that many of these initiatives come in those settings where the use of technologies may not be feasible or may not be applied, but yet we could take generic lessons from these, that which activities support which kind of skills development, what kind of learning outcomes are supported by which technologies, and we could map those activities in a face-to-face domain, and that would be really, really good. Also, I feel the design of learning spaces, this is going to be one of the other challenges, that is, how do you combine these activities across various spaces? So you might be doing some activities in the physical domain, some in the 2D domain, some in the 3D domain. So how do you combine these activities to make sense to the students? And how the design of the activities, let's say in physical learning spaces, influence the design in your 2D spaces or in the design of 3D spaces. Now, there are people who have set up school buildings in a 3D space, and they have asked students to move around this 3D space and see how students interact with this virtual building. And that has then influenced their design in the physical world. Now, there is the library in Birmingham in the UK. What they have done is they have set up a virtual library in Second Life so that people living in Birmingham and who frequently go to the library, they can come into this virtual world, move around the library and give feedback to the designer, and that gives feedback to the designer through observations, and then you can make the changes in your design of the physical spaces. So I think the design of these learning spaces, how physical spaces can impact on the design of 3D spaces and vice versa, is going to make an effect, I feel, in the future. And I think amongst all the social media, one thing that hasn't picked up to that extent is the 3D virtual environment. And through our experiences and looking at people in various initiatives, especially in the US, is that these environments can really support STEM education. So if I was to teach somebody how to use a voltmeter or galvanometer or whatever they were going to do in the actual lab, they could do these interactions with simulations in a 3D environment before they go to an actual lab setting. So you can provide them with the training in a safe and in a 3D environment through simulations before they go into the actual world. So that is why I feel that in the future, STEM education would really be influenced by 3D environments, and we are already taking the first steps towards it at our university. And as I said, learning analytics is one of the other topics for research agenda for the future. So these are the topics I feel that we would perhaps be working on in the next few years in this area of social media. And for any further dialogue, those are my contact details. And there is a list of publications of our research team at that URL. And it's hard to take the URLs from here, so please do feel free to contact me, and I'll be very happy to have further conversations. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandhya.